Welcome everyone to yet another SDN Community Voices, our weekly touch point between you, the followers, and the community of the Service Design Network, and the amazing voices that we have throughout the world here in the Service Design community. And today I'm very excited to bring Marie Daley to talk a little bit of us. She's coming from Canada, so it's quite early there. So I'm very happy that she managed to join. And also, before we start, remember that you can drop any questions in the chat below, and we're going to answer them later on during the Q&A segment. But for now, let's bring her to the stage. Hey, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. And I would ask you to introduce yourself a little bit to anybody that is joining.
Sure, yeah. As Felipe mentioned, my name is Marie, and I am joining you from Canada. I'm here in Toronto, although I'm actually originally from St. John's, Newfoundland. So a shout out to my friends on the East Coast, if anyone happens to catch this. But yeah, I think professionally, I self-identify as a service designer, but I also have a pretty varied career history. So sometimes I find it hard to describe sort of my exact field or exactly what I do or have done. But I think that's really common in the service design community. So I'm hoping folks relate to that. But my first kind of real pivot into human-centered design and service design was in 2016. So I've been practicing in this space and now starting more recently to lead teams in this space since 2016. So that's going on 9 years, which is getting to be a longer amount of time than I had realized.
Yeah, I think for me, 2016 being 9 years ago is just a crazy fact on itself. But then that's another thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then so you started with human-centered design 2016. When was kind of the transition then to more of a service design? I think there's always this thing in service design industry with the namings and stuff, but where did you actually find service design on itself?
Yeah, so I think I started with like design thinking or human-centered design or business design at my MBA program. And I did a number of like intensive courses and focused study in that space and eventually got a job after. And it was more in the, I'd say like generic human-centered design space. But then I landed with a team at TELUS, which is a telecommunications company here in Canada. And they had a really powerful service design practice already up and running. And I was really, really excited to land that because I wanted to work. I had sort of been like learning more about the different kind of design varieties under the umbrella, and service design was one that I really gravitated towards. So that was just a few years later in 2019, I think. And that was let me practice service design, but I would say it also was a right fit for me where I had actually been like rejected or discouraged from some other service design roles because I wasn't like I didn't have a design background or like a capital D designer, and that was something that I felt would hold me back. But the particular way this team at TELUS was structured was service design, but also heavily focused on the strategy skill set. And so I was able to take kind of that side of things that I had worked on previous in my career and through my MBA and really blend the two together so that I felt like I could be a really, really powerful member of the team once I got my sea legs and really got a few practice rounds and early projects under my belt. So that was service design and strategy. And then from there, my subsequent roles were different combinations, sometimes leaning more heavily towards service design, sometimes more heavily towards strategy. And then now I actually lead a mixed practice. So it's UX research, it's CX strategy, it's service design, and then we work with lots of other design disciplines as well. And so that multidisciplinary background has sort of like really paid off for me in that I can play in this space. And but I really often feel like service design is almost at the heart of a lot of it. Like to me, it feels like a core generalist skill set within design, and then there's sort of like deeper specialties aside.
Yeah, true. I get this question a lot. What is service design, right? And I feel that depending on the person, of course, but if I know that they're more prone to know about UX or CX, I kind of go and say, yeah, it's kind of a part of it. We don't really do the whole thing. Maybe if you understand, maybe on UX, people really think about digital. I'm like, yeah, we do digital also, but there's also all the physical touch points that you have to consider along the way and everything, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah. And then you started in telecommunications, now you're in banking. So you had also a very big mix of different types of areas working on that, right? So what are some of the insights or ideas that you got from working on this type of different types of
Yeah, I
service?
think I always sort of pictured myself working in like a smaller company, maybe more of a niche industry or a startup. That's sort of where I felt like I would have the most fun in my earlier career. But that's never actually happened, because what I've noticed is with those few companies that I did land in, they're bigger, more complex, matrixed organizations. In Canada, in telecommunications and in banking, they're very much so like legacy players. Like some of them are like, I think the bank is over 150 years old. And what comes with that is a really interesting challenge, which sort of really hits, or like, I guess is why this sort of topic of multidisciplinary work is so um, relevant to me. Like, what I've learned is that the kind of the innovation challenges or the design challenges or building a transformation is actually so similar from an organization like a telecommunications company to a bank. And I'm imagining even further, I'm imagining we could look at sort of maybe healthcare systems and government agencies. Like, they sort of all have this thing in common, which is that they're so complex and they're so hard to move. It's so hard to make a movement in a new direction or to transform a service experience. And so one of the things that I really learned at TELUS that I ended up being able to bring to the bank, and there's a few of us here at the bank that are also telecommunications background, and it's that idea of needing to be so tightly integrated with channels other than digital. So I work for the digital division of the bank, but and a lot of the folks that we work with are very used to just thinking digital, but more and more we're being asked to think, how are our service experiences integrating with the contact center, with our physical locations, our branches? And that's a way of thinking that's really powerful from service designers. And it's something that we're starting to really be able to shine in, where some of our digital peers are a little bit more tentative or a little bit more unsure, not necessarily in how to execute their work, but in terms of how do we build alignment and how do we start to understand the different ways of thinking that some of our counterparts in other channels are really drawn to or governed by.
Yeah.
So I think, like, more than anything, moving from industry to industry has made me realize that the skill set that we have in service design is very much so industry agnostic. And in fact, a lot of the most interesting innovation challenges are happening in industries that we don't see as being as innovative, which I find to be kind of satisfying, because it sort of feels like, well, I don't know what's next, but I know that there's like an infinite number of industries, challenges, and companies that are struggling to change. And so I think that's been a great learning for me, having made some of those jumps.
Mm. Yeah, I think this systemic view that we have in service design really comes into play here, right? So you're saying those companies are so big, they have so many different services and systems working together, which makes it much harder to innovate, maybe, but also creates this play field for a service designer to
Mhm.
understand, okay, how can we better the connection between this and create a better experience and overall tie it better together, right?
Totally. Because I mean, I think more and more clients they're not looking at a single interaction as their relationship with the bank or with that company. They're looking at the whole picture, right? And so if they're evaluating whether they feel happy as a client at the bank, that includes the contact center, it includes when they walk into a branch, it includes when they self-serve at an ATM, and it includes all of their digital interactions. And so it's not good enough anymore for us to say, like, well, our digital part is good, so like end-to-end digital is good, but that's not really end-to-end. And so the like really like almost like unseen work that you have to do to make relationships with people that work in departments that you don't work in, or in our case, the footprint of the bank around the downtown where our offices are, we work in different buildings, we work in different neighborhoods, right? So the effort to kind of create the bridge is quite high, but I think it's partly the work that we do in service design. But I mean, I always get reminded of this at events like the Service Design Global Conference. Like, service designers are sometimes we're a diverse breed, but we're also have a lot in common, and that ability to make connections and the willingness to sort of put in the time to make the human relationships and to find commonalities is really unique. And it's almost those soft skills that I notice are I'll say our CX design team more broadly, not just the service designers, but our CX folks are just like really good at it. Like, they have energy to make the relationships, where we often have to be kind of nudging and encouraging of some of our digital peers to do the same, and remind them that we kind of have to look out of our own smaller domain, and make sure that we're part of the broader team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're mentioning, of course, these different teams, right? So the UX research, the CX strategy, and the service design teams. And of course, you end up having to create bridges in between them a little bit in the work. And how is the way you approach that, creating those bridges between those different disciplines?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a work in progress. I don't think we have the right formula figured out, but I guess like anything, that's I guess why it's interesting. When I started on this team, we were all siloed in the sense that we were under sort of a broad banner of CX design, but we had leaders for each discipline, and we would work on projects even separately and prioritize projects separately. One thing that changed, we there was a structural change where our leaders structured it so that we'd have multidisciplinary pods that would be more aligned with like a specific type of client journey at the bank, and we would be aligned with those stakeholders. And that meant that, like, instead of our immediate team being just service designers or just UX researchers or just foresight practitioners, we would essentially have a clustered team. So your team would be a few service designers, a few UX researchers, and a few other practitioners. And so that was a step towards organizing the work in a way that we could really cross disciplines more organically. But it worked well. It was definitely a new change. We were getting used to it, and after about a year, I think we were noticing that, like, we're definitely seeing some improvements, but we're still thinking of ourselves as operating separately, doing separate projects. And so we've really been doing a lot of kind of coaching and the way we're structuring projects to try to intentionally, pair a service designer with a UX researcher on the project that they're doing, and see what happens that way. See if you start to see a service designer taking on some of the UX research scope, or at least partnering more closely, and vice versa. And sometimes that does happen really organically if you get the folks that are, genuinely really want to tackle research, for example, or a researcher who genuinely wants to tackle maybe journey design. We see that happening organically. And then there's other cases where we see that it's not coming naturally, or for whatever reason, it doesn't interest them, or they don't feel like they have the skills to do it. And so that's where we've looked at, like, how do we approach this in our one-on-one coaching? We've done things like tried to be more explicit about each practice's processes. So each practice has been building some form of playbook, and then, really creating time and space to read that playbook out and share it with our team, who can actually, put it into action. And the best part is seeing someone who's, a researcher, and they're saying, like, hey, like, this toolkit is amazing, I'm just going to use it, and I've been using it all month, and, like, I'm able to take on parts of this project that weren't originally in my scope. And I don't know, I think, like, one of the things that I learned at the conference in the fall there was that the idea of AI, like, enhancing our roles and kind of everyone's footprint and the types of things they can do, is growing. But if everyone's footprint is growing, then we've got this blurring of the lines, and that can be scary for some people. And I think we see that to an extent, but it can also be this really exciting opportunity to collaborate more, or to collaborate differently than we have in the past. So I think so far it's definitely a work in progress. There's wins, and there's I won't say losses, but there's areas where we don't make as much progress.
Yeah.
But especially, I think when you see these projects, especially at the bank, the more they're prioritizing scopes that are by definition including multiple channels. I've noticed that those are the areas where the researchers and the service designers almost like have to like they collaborate by default because it's such a complex subject matter area. And they each need to kind of help each other figure out how to best tackle it. Yeah, so I'm curious if that's something that resonates with the group listening and with the rest of the network. Because I think we can, like, sometimes I see the real value in honing just like a practice and a discipline. And then I wonder, I think I'm overly ready to like throw our process out the window and just do what makes sense on a project. But then sometimes I get a little bit nervous that I'm, by creating such a multidisciplinary approach, are you lessening the effectiveness of any one of the methodologies? And that's something I'm trying to find that line for myself as I'm coaching others.
Yeah, I think that blurred line is something that is kind of difficult to know how much you should be blurring, how much you should be distincting. So you make sure that the improvements or also the benefits also of each one of the fields are being put forward in throughout the
Hmm.
project, right?
Hmm. I think one example where the collaboration is so mutually beneficial is in the developing area of metrics for client experience. And where,
Right.
like, right now, for example, the bank, and I argue like the whole industry of banking in Canada, is really focused on kind of marketing metrics like sales or appointments booked, or NPS is a big one. And it just doesn't, it's not diagnostic enough for us to go on when it comes to like, how do we take the data that we're getting and the metrics that we're tracking and turn it into informed design decisions. So we're currently looking at a body of work around CX metrics, and how do we think about that a little bit differently? And instead of relying on our kind of business line owners to track it, we're trying to say, like, can we own and track some kind of
Oh,
CX metric that feels a little bit more useful in terms of what we can learn, do, and change based on that information. And that's one where some of our, like, our UX research lead is like really taking the reins on kind of the strategy behind it, the theory behind it, and making sure the concepts that we're trying to measure are sound from a quantitative perspective, but then actually getting those embedded into those points along the journey or service experience. We also really need the service designers. And I think the service designers are also so hungry for something that can be measured, because we've really struggled with that, I think, as an entire practice, that they're so excited to have someone to help them with it. And that's one
yeah.
area where, again, it's still a work in progress, but I could see we won't succeed if we don't have both of those two pieces really putting their best brain power behind it, because it's such a hard problem to solve.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see those insights, right? So a bank probably has so many different, I would say, customer satisfaction scores and all of those things, because probably throughout the years they started doing it. But then you realize that those are not really actionable for you as a
Yeah.
designer on whatever team you're working on. So then you have to reimagine those as a way to be better, and then you work better for the customers and for the company. So it's quite an
Mhm.
interesting example for sure.
No, exactly, exactly. We sometimes will get like kind of that scary messaging from way above that's saying like, oh, like NPS is dropped, like fix it. And you're like, but I don't know how to fix it. We don't know what's going wrong because we don't have any of those along the journey data points. We just have this
Mhm.
holistic, you kind of slap on a holistic score, and it's really hard to know what to do with it. So I
Yeah.
won't say we've cracked it, but I that's one of our big focuses this year.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it kind of becomes also a question of bias, because the person that created the score, created the questionnaire, the questions and stuff, is the one that is inputting the bias of what they actually want to get back. But then those
Yes.
might not be actually useful to the teams that need to work through those metrics, right?
Totally, totally. I mean, I'm an NPS skeptic, and but I'm also not informed enough, so I hesitate a little bit to speak on it. But I mean, whether or not you'll recommend the bank, for example, I mean, I guess it's good. It's good that if that's a high score, but it doesn't mean anything. Like, it means almost zero to me when it comes to could I improve this digital experience in a different way? Could we make something more seamless? Which things should we invest in to make more seamless? Because there's hundreds of options.
Yeah.
It really doesn't help us do any sort of prioritization. But I sort of hope my superiors at the bank aren't listening.
We can cut this part. No joke. Yeah. But I mean, also one thing that came to mind, circling back when we were talking about blurred lines between the disciplines, was a little bit the profiles or the personalities of different people that we're working on, right? Because each person in that kind of cell from the discipline is going to be different on how they work, how excited or how easily they are open to new metrics, to new methods, and things like that. So, how do you work a little bit on that when you're talking also more on the person to person scale, if one person is more involved than the other or something like that?
Mhm. Yeah, I think I think because so much of it is like we are one team, and I think there's a good amount of buy-in after we're about a year and a half out from that shift from separate disciplines to shared disciplines. I do think there's a healthy amount of like feeling of being on the same team, and there are some pieces of our culture that really are just we're the same. We are very similar. We're more alike than we're not. But one area I've noticed is that service designers are collaborative by default. Like
Hmm.
by and large, they're like they don't want to work alone in a vacuum. They want to anything that's productive is in a discussion format, is in a casual working session, it's in a workshop, even like project planning. Like I want to make a project plan as a work, like I want to do a workshop to have a project plan, versus the let's take the UX researchers, and I'm picking on them because they're sort of the larger group between all the others, but they are, I think, a little bit more inclined to have their own time and space to, analyze the information they're looking at, come up with their insights so that they can share them back. And I think it's a bit of a I think it has to be a longer evolution to like expect someone who's used to practicing in that not silo, because they're not siloed. It's not a lack of collaboration, but it's a preference to like come up with their insights on like I think it's the preference for time and space to think about the problem on their own, or to
Yeah.
get the time and space to think about it deeply before sharing it back. And I get that. Like I think if I have family members who are in the science field and scientists, and the idea that everything is collaborative to them is like their social nightmare, right? Like it's not what they want to do. And so I'm starting to try to piece apart like how much do we let that be and let someone use their preferred working style for the work that they're doing, versus how much do we push for this sort of culture evolution where everyone is coming onto that more collaborative by default page. But for me, it's like talking to the people on my team in our one-on-ones and asking them like maybe what their preferred style is, or what if they're experiencing any blockers, and allow them to bring up if collaboration feels like a problem to them, allow them to service it themselves instead of telling them that that's what we want to see. Because I think you really don't want to have a heavy hand on someone's personal working style. But the other thing I try to do is to be encouraging of like the positivity around work in progress, like the lack of not like sort of not needing to have something polished in order to have a discussion about it, indicating my preference to see something while it's still sticky notes on a Miro or whatever tool we're using. And I think that starts to work. But let's say with a service designer, they'll show their work in progress, and there's no apologies. It's like, yeah, like I'm still thinking this through. I don't know, but like it looks maybe something over here and maybe something over there, and I'm worried about this. And it's a little bit more organic versus
Yeah.
let's say it's like a preview of insights share back from a round of research we just did. There's a lot of like, I'm sorry, it's not really organized, but like here's my 10 points. And I'm like, oh, this
Yeah.
is actually quite organized, and it's okay that it's not on slides. Like it's good that we're seeing it this way. I'm hoping that the input you get from me and the input that we might get from some of the rest of the team will help you make it better. But you can't just break down that barrier of feeling self-conscious or feeling like it's not polished in a month or even in a year. Maybe like it'll take a long time for people to feel like yes, I want to work out in the open. I want people to see my drafts, and I feel safe enough to do that. So yeah, I think it's about like letting people work how they want to work, but encouraging a certain type of openness, and hoping that the more you encourage it or the more you demonstrate it, the more safe they feel. But yeah, I do think maybe psychological safety is, which is true in any discipline, right? Like, or any workplace, maybe that's sort of at the root of this, feeling safe to work out in the open, feeling safe to work collaboratively, especially if your discipline background doesn't default to that level of collaboration like service design might.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll also open for anybody that's listening right now. If you have any questions for Marie about her journey, about all these topics we have been talking about, multidisciplinarity, the blending between the disciplines, different ways to work and everything, just drop them in the comments below and we will take them to answer live. And to start, actually, I have a question that is not here on the comments because it was sent before the live. But Katie Sedler, she asked that she would love to hear a little bit your thoughts on specialized versus generalized skill sets, and how do you see this landscape changing over the next few years?
I think that's a great question that I would almost want to ask back to Katie, because I think I have an opinion, but it's really only an opinion. So I don't feel that confident, I guess, to say it, or I don't want people to listen to it as a rule. But I think my own preference is towards more generalists. I've noticed that when it comes to people that I collaborate with, and then now that I'm leading teams, people that are on my team, I think like kind of the more general the skill set, the more it's like the more they can be fully engaged, because they can contribute to a problem space in multiple ways. And if it's an ambiguous problem space where we really don't know where it will land or what type of skill set will be best, having kind of that literacy across multiple domains will really, really help to have you be able to jump in and feel comfortable no matter which way the project ends up going, or being literate enough in a broad variety of fields to say, you know what, we don't need this, we need that. I don't have any more expertise in that, but now I know who to bring it to. So almost like the expertise to triage, which I would also consider to be a little bit more of a generalist skill set. I also think there's something in this trend with AI where we're saying, like, if every role can broaden what they're actually contributing to, if you can have a developer that's able to, through AI, you know, get a little bit more design literate, or bring in client insights because they were able to synthesize things that they scraped off some internet forum, like they're really, everyone might be flattening or generalizing their skill sets. The more they have kind of the depth of expertise that AI might be able to provide. So I wonder, yeah, my short answer is generalist, but I think it also depends like where you are in the process. Like often where our team is situated a little bit more at the front end of a problem space and really shaping it and framing it and defining some requirements. Obviously, we have some really technical developers that sit just down the hall and they are working on a very defined space, and they need those like specialty skills to build what they're doing. And we need, we've got a team that does conversation and chat, and that's its own area of even further specialization within the technical world. So I think we need that. But I think where I sit and where a lot of service designers I feel can add a lot of value, I think that generalist skill set might be more and more sufficient, at least, if not a superpower.
Amazing. Then we have a question from Ricardo Ramirez, which for some reason is showing as a LinkedIn user, but it's Ricardo. He's asking, curious to hear about any potential new practices you're looking at bringing into your teams outside of foresight, UX research, behavioral science, etc. Are there any new practices you think would be beneficial or are excited about its potential?
Yeah, I mean, you are very aware of all of the different practices we work with already, Ricardo, and you're listing them there. So you're sort of making it a hard question with, those are some of the ones I would list that we need to work closer with. I do think one area is like beta and launch management, which we do have team member that does this. But I think figuring out how that is something we can leverage as another point in our like design and CX experience process. Like, how do we better tighten with like what's happening at launch and what's happening just post launch. But in terms of like fields of like influence, I know that like environmental science and sustainability is something that we constantly try to crack, but it always ends up becoming sort of a side of desk effort, and it never gets the full attention that we need. And I think a lot of that is because, especially for the digital sustainability and what does it mean to design for circularity in a digital context, I think that we just don't have that deep subject matter expertise that we really need to get traction. So I think that's another potential horizon for us. And then I also think we do have a digital accessibility team, and they tend to work a little bit closer on like the latter stages of the development process, closer to like what are the nuts and bolts and like technical requirements for accessible tools. But I think there's another big opportunity to bring that more into the upfront strategic design flow, so that we're able to really design for everybody. But my understanding of the space is that if we can design for some of the edge cases, we can also find benefits for all of our clients. And I think that's something that we're not leveraging. And we have the expertise in-house. It's more about how do we bring it closer into our portion of the design work to do. But yeah, I don't have any more like new exciting newfangled ideas about like new design practices. I think I'm always wishing I could spend more time maybe going to university again to learn more. So I'd love to continue that discussion.
Yeah, nice. Then as a final question, since our time's approaching to an end, we have a question from Pranali. Hope I'm pronouncing it right. A lot of times designer is one role for stakeholders. They don't understand the nuances of CX, UX, UI, research, and all of those things in such context. How do you position service design contributions in front of stakeholders?
Yeah, this is a very relatable, like I'll call it a problem. It's a very relatable problem where sometimes I'm also very worried when we come on and someone's never worked with us, they're going to expect, beautifully designed screens by the end of what we're doing. And we don't have the skills for that. And it's not why we add value. So some of the ways I speak about it is to, really get a broader context into the problem space to de-risk some of the bigger assumptions, that we can translate those into requirements. And then another way I often speak about the value is that we want to look at something end to end. So even though you're designing for point D, we're going to look at A, B, C. D will fit in, and then we're also going to look at E and F, and we're going to try to show you where that fits in context, because the requirements you need must be defined with those other contexts, and that's a skill set that we can kind of uniquely provide. So those are some of like the more tangible ways I speak about the deliverables. And then I always also like to sort of bring in the collaborative by default, optimistic by default, and some of like the more softer side or like the mindset side of how we work. And so they kind of get that breath of fresh air by working with us in addition to the deliverable. And so even if they don't fully understand the deliverable, or they can't quite put their finger on why this is different than, let's say, what a product designer would do, they know that they had a positive experience, and they know that they learned a lot or thought differently about the problem space. And to me, that's good enough. Like, they don't need to understand the nuances of like any specific role. And I'm trying to let go, and I'm trying to kind of encourage my peers to let go a little bit. Like, any annoyance we feel when people don't understand what we do, it's like, let's just do our thing and do it well, and they'll see, even if they can't explain it, right?
Yeah, I think letting go is definitely a good mantra to have in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a constant battle. Otherwise, it's a long career to be fighting about what you do.
Yeah. And then with that, we're coming to, I don't know why it happened like this, but with that, we come to the end of our time together. Thank you very much for joining us, Marie, and sharing these amazing insights.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and arranging it all. And thanks everyone for joining and asking questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's my first time doing this. It's fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And to everybody that joined us online, thank you very much for being here, for asking any questions, for interacting with us online. I think it really brings life to these episodes that we do every week when we really have people here interacting. Next week, we're not going to have a scheduled episode. Instead, we're going to have the SDN Global Cafe that happen every month or every two times per month. It's going to be with one of the winners of the SDN Awards. So I really recommend that you go there. It is exclusive to our members. So go there on the link tree to see more information about the SDN Global Cafe, or also how can you become a member of the SDN community in general. So thank you very much, and see you again for another episode of the SDN Community Voices in 2 weeks. Bye.